The ship was not made for humans. It was an alien cruiser that moved with silent power through the endless dark of space. It was built for speed and strength, with glowing walls and strange controls that no human could understand. And yet on this journey, there was one human among them. His name was Daniel. He was not a soldier or a leader. He was not an engineer or a scientist. He was simply a traveler. He had bought a ticket to reach another colony world. Nothing more. The aliens on board looked at him with curiosity, some with polite smiles, others with quiet whispers. Humans were rare passengers in their part of the galaxy. Daniel kept to himself, sitting near the wide glass window that showed the stars flowing past. He listened to the hum of the engines. He felt the faint vibration under his boots. The alien crew moved like shadows, tall and thin, their eyes glowing faint blue. They spoke in calm voices, but never included him. He was just a passenger, nothing important. But something felt wrong that night. The lights above flickered once, only for a second. Most of the crew ignored it. Daniel frowned. He had seen enough old ships on Earth to know that lights never flickered without reason. He kept watching. Later, as the ship crossed into a sector known for drifting rocks and magnetic storms, the scanners gave a soft warning sound. The alien officers looked at their panels, muttering in low voices. They dismissed it as interference. Daniel shifted uneasily in his seat. He had no training, but he trusted his instincts. Something was not right. Hours passed. The stars outside grew sharper, colder. The silence of space felt heavier than before. Daniel noticed crew members exchanging worried glances. One of them adjusted the controls again and again, like trying to force a machine to obey. The captain, a tall alien with silver skin and long ridges down his head, stood firm. He told his crew to stay calm, to trust the systems, but Daniel could feel the tension, the kind of silence that comes before a storm. When Daniel walked past the corridor near the engineering section, he heard a deep sound, like metal groaning under pressure. He stopped. The walls trembled slightly. A low vibration echoed through the floor. He pressed his palm against the cold metal. It was shaking. An alien engineer rushed past him, holding strange tools. Daniel asked, "Is something wrong?" The alien gave him a short look, almost annoyed. "Passengers stay seated. We will handle it." The engineer hurried away. Daniel returned to his seat, but his mind was not at peace. He remembered planes back on Earth, the way a pilot's calm voice could hide fear, the way passengers were told to relax even when danger was near. He tapped his fingers against the seat arm, staring out the window. Then it happened. The ship shuddered, lights dimmed, alarms rang out with sharp alien tones. Crew members shouted. The smooth walls flashed red warning symbols. Daniel grabbed the side of his seat. As the whole cruiser tilted, stars outside spun in a dizzy blur. Passengers cried out. Some aliens clutched their children. Others held on to seats. Daniel's heart raced. The captain shouted orders. The crew ran to their stations. Yet the chaos was clear. The mighty ship was in trouble. The engines roared, then died. The hum was gone, replaced by silence broken only by alarms. Daniel felt weight shift. Gravity itself flickered for a second. His stomach lifted as if he was falling, then slammed back down when gravity returned. He looked around. Aliens panicked, their calm nature breaking apart. One shouted about failing systems. Another cried that the shields were unstable. Daniel stood up slowly, gripping the seat. His eyes moved from the flickering lights to the frightened crew. He was only a passenger, he told himself. This was not his problem, not his job. But as the ship drifted powerless through the dark void, he knew one thing deep inside. Something was going terribly wrong, and if nobody acted fast, they were all going to die. And so the human sat back down, his hands tightening into fists, his eyes sharp. He waited for the moment when he would no longer be just a passenger. He did not know it yet, but very soon, the aliens would see what a human could truly do. The alarms screamed louder, sharp alien tones echoing through every corridor. Red lights flashed across the ceiling, and the ship shook again. Daniel braced himself against the seat as another violent tremor ran through the cruiser. He could hear metal straining, as if the ship itself was crying out. The captain barked orders in his alien tongue, his voice deep and commanding, but the crew looked frightened, hands moving over controls that refused to respond. Daniel watched as one officer slammed his glowing fingers against a panel. The screen blinked. and then went dark. The officer cursed softly. Passengers screamed. Some fell to the floor as gravity flickered again. Daniel grabbed the rail beside him, holding tight as his stomach lurched. In the chaos, he saw an alien mother pulling her child close, whispering words of comfort though her eyes were filled with terror. The engines were silent. The hum that had carried them through space was gone. Only alarms and the sound of frightened voices filled the air. The ship was drifting, powerless. Outside the wide glass windows, stars spun slowly, and in the distance Daniel could see dark shapes, asteroids, dozens of them, turning slowly in the void. The captain shouted something, and a crewman called back. Daniel could not understand the language, but he could read fear in their faces. One crew member cried out, pointing at the screen that showed their course. Daniel saw the path, the glowing line moving straight toward the asteroid field. Panic grew. Voices overlapped. The passengers looked to the crew for guidance, but the crew were just as lost. Daniel's heart pounded. He was no pilot, no engineer, yet he could not ignore what he saw. They were drifting towards certain death. An alien officer ran past him. Daniel reached out. What happened? The officer stopped only for a second, his eyes glowing faint with fear. Core failure, he said in broken human words. Engines dead. Controls not answer. We fall. Then he rushed on, leaving Daniel standing frozen. Daniel thought quickly. He had no training, no alien knowledge, but he knew one thing. Machines were machines, systems were systems. Panic never fixed anything. He pushed his way through the trembling crowd and headed toward the control deck. Aliens shouted at him to go back, to stay seated, but he kept moving, his jaw set. The deck was chaos. Crew members arguing, alarms flashing, screens filled with warnings. The captain stood at the center, his silver skin shining in the red light, his eyes fierce, but his hands clenched tightly behind his back. Daniel stepped forward. What's the problem? The room went silent for a moment, all eyes on him, some filled with anger, others with disbelief. A passenger, a human, daring to speak on the command deck. One officer hissed, "Human, leave. This is not for you." Another growled, "Passengers do not belong here." But Daniel did not move. "Your ship is drifting into rocks," he said firmly. "You need to do something now." The captain's eyes narrowed. "We are doing everything," he said in rough human words. "But systems fail. Back up, not respond." Daniel looked around, his eyes moving over the panels. He did not understand the symbols, but he could see the structure, lines of power flowing, flashing red where circuits were broken. He pointed at one section. "What about manual override? Cut power here, send it through another line." The crew looked shocked, as if the idea itself was strange. One officer muttered, "Manual, primitive," but another's eyes widened. It could work, if we reroute." The captain glared at Daniel, then back at his officers. Silence stretched. Then he gave a sharp nod. "Try." The crew rushed to follow the idea, pulling levers, opening panels. Sparks flew as cables were torn free and reconnected. Daniel stood back, his hands shaking, but his eyes steady. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the lights flickered. Engines coughed like dying lungs. Then silence again. Frustration filled the room. An officer cursed. "Not enough. The core is too damaged." Outside the window, the asteroids grew larger, their jagged edges shining with cold starlight. The ship drifted closer with every passing second. Passengers cried out. Some prayed in alien words. Others closed their eyes, waiting for the end. Daniel felt his chest tighten. Fear clawed at him, but he forced it down. He took a deep breath. "Listen to me," he said, his voice cutting through the panic. "You can't sit here and argue. You have tools, you have minds, but you are frozen. We need to move this ship now, or we are all dead." The aliens stared at him, their glowing eyes reflecting fear and doubt, but also something else, a spark of hope. The captain finally spoke, his deep voice trembling slightly. "You, human, you think you can save us?" Daniel swallowed hard, then nodded. "I don't know, but I will try." For the first time since the alarms began, silence filled the deck. The crew looked at one another, then back at the human, a passenger, an outsider, yet in that moment the only one who seemed unafraid to act. And as the asteroids loomed closer, their sharp shadows filling the windows, Daniel knew this was no longer just a ride across the stars. This was survival, and it was only the beginning. The ship groaned again as the asteroid field loomed closer. Sharp rocks spun slowly in the void, their shadows stretching across the glass windows. Daniel stood firm in the middle of the command deck, surrounded by aliens who stared at him with a mix of doubt and fear. He took a slow breath, his eyes moving across the strange controls. Most of the symbols meant nothing to him, but machines had patterns. Wires and circuits always spoke a language of power, and Daniel had spent his life fixing broken things on Earth, old cars, faulty machines, power grids in his small town. He was not a genius, but he understood when something wanted to work and when something was fighting against itself. "Where is your manual control?" he asked, his voice steady. The aliens looked at each other, confused. Finally, one officer pointed toward a panel on the far wall. It was covered in dust, rarely touched. Daniel hurried over. His hands brushed across the strange levers and knobs. They were stiff and used. "Help me," he said, looking at the crew. Two engineers stepped forward reluctantly. Daniel pulled at one lever. It resisted, then moved with a heavy clunk. Sparks hissed above. The lights flickered. The engines coughed again, still not alive, but not dead either. The captain's eyes narrowed. "You know our systems?" he asked, suspicion in his voice. Daniel shook his head. "I don't know them, but I know machines. They talk if you listen." One officer sneered. "This is foolish. He guesses only." But another whispered, "He tries while we freeze." The floor rumbled again. Loose panels shook. Outside, one of the asteroids spun closer, so near that Daniel could see craters on its surface. The crew gasped. The passengers screamed. Time was running out. Daniel looked at the wiring inside the panel. Glowing tubes and lines of energy ran through it. One section was dark. "Power's not reaching here," he muttered. "You need to reroute it." He pointed at the cables. The alien engineers hesitated, but when the captain gave a sharp nod, they pulled the lines free and connected them again. This time the ship trembled violently. The engines roared to life for half a second, then failed again. But Daniel's eyes lit up. "That's it," he said. "We're close." The captain leaned toward him. "Close is not alive, human." Daniel ignored the remark. He scanned the panels, then spotted something. An emergency vent system. He had no idea what the alien words meant, but the shape of the control was universal, a valve to release pressure. "That's it," he said, pointing. "Your system's choking itself. Too much pressure." The engineers rushed to follow. One twisted the valve. A hiss filled the room. Steam or gas vented out through hidden pipes. Lights steadied for a moment. The engines roared again. This time longer. A deep pulse shook the floor, and then silence. Passengers held their breath, waiting. The crew froze. Then the ship gave a low hum. Faint but steady, like the heartbeat of a giant. Daniel felt the vibration through the deck. "There," he whispered. "It's alive." The asteroids were still close. Far too close. The ship had only partial power, drifting slower now, but still moving into danger. The captain turned to Daniel. "We have engines, weak, but no direction. Controls fail." Daniel thought quickly. He remembered flying small planes back on Earth, not as a pilot, but as a student once. He remembered how thrust could be used even without proper steering. "Can you fire engines unevenly? More on one side than the other?" The crew blinked, confused. One engineer muttered, I think yes." "Then do it," Daniel said firmly. "Push harder on one side. It'll turn us away. Even a little can save us." The captain hesitated, then gave the order. The engineers obeyed. The ship shuddered, one side pushing harder, slowly, painfully. The cruiser tilted. Outside, the asteroid edge scraped past, so close that the hull shook with its gravity pull. The passengers cried out as sparks fell from the ceiling, but the ship cleared it, missing by only meters. The crew stared at Daniel, disbelief in their glowing eyes. The captain's face was unreadable, but his jaw tightened. He was seeing what no alien had seen before, a human refusing to freeze, a human turning instinct into survival. The asteroids were not gone. More loomed ahead, but the path was shifting. The danger was still alive. Yet for the first time since the failure, the crew felt a spark of hope. Daniel's chest heaved, sweat ran down his face, his hands trembled, but he looked at the captain. "We're not safe yet," he said, "but we can be." If you trust me. The captain studied him in silence, his silver skin glowing in the red emergency light. Finally, he gave a short nod. Then lead us, human. And in that moment, Daniel stopped being just a passenger. He became the one voice guiding a ship of aliens through the storm of death that lay ahead. The alien cruiser moved slowly, engines coughing with uneven power. Each thrust pushed it just enough to slip past the spinning rocks. Daniel stood on the command deck, his hands gripping the edge of a panel, sweat running down his face, but his eyes sharp. The captain gave quick orders, his officers obeyed, but always they glanced at the human, waiting for his voice, waiting for his strange, simple ideas. Daniel could feel the weight of their eyes. It was not respect yet, it was desperation. They needed him because they had no one else. The asteroid field grew thicker. Giant stones turned like blades in the dark. One slammed into another, sending shards flying. The cruiser's shields flickered as small fragments struck. The sound echoed through the hull. Passengers screamed. Children cried. The air itself seemed heavy with fear. Shields dropping. One officer shouted, "We cannot take many hits." Daniel forced himself to think. The ship was still half dead. It needed more than small fixes. What about external panels? He asked. Can we close sections of the hull to stop leaks? The crew stared blankly. One engineer finally nodded. Yes, but manual, someone must go. Daniel's chest tightened. He knew what that meant. Outside, where the cold of space waited. Then go, he said. If we don't hold the ship together now, it won't matter. The captain frowned, his silver eyes fixed on him. You would risk this? Daniel looked back at the window, at the massive asteroid rolling slowly toward them. I don't see a choice, he said simply. Moments later, Daniel stood in an alien suit, its glass visor glowing faint blue, the fabric stiff and heavy. Alien engineers worked beside him, their tall bodies moving awkwardly. None wanted to be here, but they followed. The airlock opened, silence swallowed them. Outside was endless black, stars burned far away. The asteroids turned like giants. Daniel pushed forward, magnetic boots gripping the hull, every step heavy, his breath loud in his helmet. The hull shook as another fragment struck. One engineer almost fell. Daniel grabbed his arm, pulling him back. Stay close, he said, his voice shaking but firm. They reached the damaged panel. Sparks hissed where metal had cracked. Daniel crouched, pulling the tool from his belt. It was alien, strange in his hands, but wires were wires, metal was metal. He began working, guiding the engineer beside him. Together they sealed the crack, closing the panel with force. Inside the ship, alarms dropped for a moment. Power steadied. Cheers rose from the passengers. The captain's eyes narrowed at the sight. The human was fixing what they thought was impossible. But there was no time to celebrate. Another tremor shook the ship. Daniel looked up, his breath caught. A massive asteroid loomed ahead, so large it blocked the stars. He shouted into the calm, "You need to move the ship now." The captain's voice came back, strained. Engines weak, no response. Daniel clenched his jaw. Then push what you have. Use every drop. I don't care if it burns out. If we don't move, we're gone. The engines roared weakly. The ship groaned, tilting slowly, painfully slow. The asteroid grew larger in Daniel's visor, its surface rough and cold. He could almost feel its pull. The alien engineers froze in fear. One whispered a prayer. Daniel shouted, "Keep working." He slammed the last panel shut, then pulled them back toward the airlock, heavy steps pounding across the hull, every second stretched thin. They slipped inside just as the cruiser turned enough to clear the asteroid. The edge of the rocks scraped their shields. The ship shuddered violently. Lights flashed, but they survived. Inside, the passengers cheered again, some crying with relief. The crew looked at Daniel as he pulled off the heavy helmet, his hair damp with sweat, his face pale, but his eyes steady. The captain approached, his tall form casting a shadow. "You act like crew, human," he said, voice low, "not passenger." Daniel shook his head. "I'm just trying to live," he said, "and to help you live too." The ship's hum grew weaker again. The temporary fixes would not last. The asteroids stretched on ahead, and beyond them, more darkness, more unknown. Daniel's chest tightened. He could feel exhaustion pulling at him, but the fire in his eyes burned stronger. This was no longer chance, no longer luck. This was survival against odds, and he would not stop until they were safe. The captain raised his hand, a gesture of alien honor. "Then lead us, Daniel," he said quietly, and for the first time the crew bowed their heads. And so the human, who boarded, as nothing more than a traveler, now stood at the center of the storm, carrying the hope of everyone on board. While the void around them promised only death, the cruiser limped forward, the engines groaning, the hull scarred, and the lights dimmed to a sickly glow. For a moment there was silence. Then a new alarm rang, sharper than before. The crew froze, their eyes wide. Daniel looked at the captain. "What now?" An officer's voice shook. "Life support failing," he said. "Air mix unstable, oxygen dropping." Passengers gasped, some clutching their throats as if they already felt the air thinning. Panic spread quickly. Mothers pulled their children close. Voices rose, the sound of fear heavier than the alarms. Daniel felt the same fear clawing at him, but he pushed it down. He stepped closer to the officer. "Where is the system?" he asked. "Where can I fix it?" The officer hesitated. The captain gave a sharp nod, and they led Daniel to the life support chamber. The doors opened with a hiss. Heat rushed out. The room was filled with smoke and the smell of burning metal. Strange alien pipes ran along the walls, glowing faint red. One engineer coughed. "The regulator is gone," he said. "Core burned. We cannot breathe for long." Daniel stepped inside, squinting through the haze. The heat pressed against his skin. Sweat ran down his neck. He scanned the machines. He did not know their design, but he saw what was wrong. Tubes melted, air leaking, pressure building in all the wrong places. "Give me tools," he said, his voice sharp. The aliens hesitated, but the captain barked an order. They obeyed, handing him strange instruments. Daniel knelt, hands moving fast. He remembered old stories of miners trapped underground, of mechanics fixing broken engines with nothing but wire and grit. Survival was always about finding a way, even when the world said there was none. He ripped a piece of piping free. Sparks flew. An alien engineer gasped. "You will break it more." But Daniel ignored him. He pressed two ends together, sealing the leak with force. He shouted for tape. They gave him an alien bonding strip, glowing faint blue. He wrapped it tight until the hiss slowed. The pressure warning dropped a little. The air grew steadier, but the oxygen mix was still wrong. Daniel coughed, his chest burning. "We need clean flow," he muttered, his eyes darting across the room. Then he saw it. Two separate pipes that should have been linked, but were blocked by melted metal. He grabbed a tool and began hammering. The sound echoing in the chamber. Sparks rained down. The aliens stepped back. One whispered, "He is mad." Another whispered, "Or he saves us." Finally, the blockage gave way. The pipes connected. A rush of fresh air hissed through. The alarms shifted from red to amber. Still dangerous, but no longer certain death. Passengers outside took deep breaths. The panic softened. Voices calmed. Mothers wept with relief as their children breathed easier. The captain entered the chamber, his silver skin glistening in the heat, his eyes fixed on the human. "You risk your life," he said slowly. "Why?" Daniel leaned back against the wall, his chest heaving, his face slick with sweat. "Because we all breathe the same air," he said, "and because sitting still never saved anyone." The captain studied him for a long moment, then gave a small bow, a gesture rare among his kind. The crew behind him lowered their heads too, for the first time not out of desperation, but out of respect. But the silence did not last. Another officer rushed in, his face pale. "Captain," he shouted, "engines overheat. We cannot hold course. Asteroid belt still ahead." The crew groaned, despair rising again. Daniel forced himself to stand, his body weak, but his eyes burning with stubborn fire. "Then we keep going," he said. "We fix it again and again until we're through." The captain's voice was low but steady. "You cannot fight the void forever, human." Daniel met his gaze. "Maybe not," he said, "but I can fight it long enough." The crew looked at him with new eyes. The passengers whispered his name, the human who was no longer just a passenger, the one who carried them through storms and suffocation. Outside, the asteroids grew thicker, sharp shadows turning in the darkness. The cruiser drifted forward, wounded but alive. The battle was not over, but a strange truth filled the air. Where the aliens faltered, a human stood tall, and that was enough to keep hope burning. The alien cruiser drifted deeper into the asteroid field, its engines wheezing like a dying beast. The lights flickered, the shields buzzed weakly. Every system was close to collapse. Daniel stood on the deck with his fists tight, his heart pounding. He knew one small hit from the larger rocks would tear them apart. The captain barked orders, his officers shouted back, but their words carried fear more than command. The passengers clung to each other, whispering prayers in alien tongues. Daniel stared at the main screen. The glowing path showed their doom, straight into the densest part of the field. He thought quickly, his mind racing. The engines could not push them. The repairs only gave moments of life. They needed something else, something desperate, something no one else would dare. "Do you have escape pods?" Daniel asked suddenly, his voice loud enough to cut through the chaos. The crew stared at him, confused. One officer nodded slowly. "Yes, but useless. They cannot carry all, only small groups." Daniel shook his head. "Not for escape," he said firmly, "for thrust." The aliens blinked, not understanding. The captain narrowed his eyes. "Explain." Daniel stepped closer to the display, pointing at the drifting line. "Your engines are weak, but the pods, they have fuel, rockets. If we link them to the hull and fire them at the same time, they can push us clear." Gasps filled the room. One officer hissed, "Madness. Pods are for life, not engines." Another growled, "They could tear the hull apart." Daniel raised his voice. "If we do nothing, the asteroids will tear us apart anyway. You want to sit and wait for death, or use what you have to live?" The room went silent. The captain's silver eyes studied him. Then he gave a slow nod. "Prepare the pods." The crew rushed, half in disbelief, half in fear. The hangar opened. Escape pods lined the walls, small crafts meant for survival. Not for this. Daniel led the engineers, his hands moving, his voice steady. "Strap them to the hull, connect fuel lines, make them push together." It was chaos. Smoke still hung in the corridors. Sparks hissed from broken wires. But the aliens worked, driven by the humans' fire. Daniel crawled under a pod, tightening clamps. His hands burned, his lungs heavy with exhaustion. But he refused to stop. The captain's voice came over the comm. "Asteroids closing, time short." Daniel wiped sweat from his brow. "Then hurry," he growled. "If we're late, none of this matters." At last the pods were set, 6 of them locked along the ship's sides, their thrusters aimed. Daniel climbed back to the deck, his heart racing. He pointed at the display. "Fire them all together, everything you've got, do it now." The captain raised his hand, gave the order. The crew pressed the glowing runes. Outside the pods lit up. Fire erupted from their engines. The cruiser shook violently. Alarms screamed. Metal groaned. Passengers cried out. But the ship moved. Slowly at first, then faster. The cruiser tilted, its nose pulling away from the densest cluster of asteroids. Rocks spun past, some scraping shields. Sparks showered. But they cleared the first wall. The crew gasped, disbelief written on their faces. Daniel gritted his teeth. "Keep firing, don't stop." The pods burned brighter, one after another exploding from the strain, their husks falling away. But their push was enough. The cruiser broke free of the thickest rocks, drifting into a wider gap. Stars glimmered through the chaos. The passengers roared in relief, voices crying, laughter mixing with tears. Children clapped their hands. The aliens turned to Daniel, awe shining in their glowing eyes. The captain stepped forward, his voice low but strong. "You risked all. You gave us chance, human." Daniel leaned against the console, his chest heaving, his body shaking from exhaustion. "We're not safe yet," he said quietly. "But we're alive, and that's what matters." The crew lowered their heads in respect. Not forced, not desperate, but true. They had seen what one human could do, not with strength, not with weapons, but with courage and ideas no one else dared. Outside, the asteroids still stretched on, danger not yet gone, but a path had opened, and for the first time the aliens believed they might survive. Daniel closed his eyes for a moment, letting the hum of the battered cruiser fill his ears. He thought of Earth, of small machines and broken engines he once fixed. He thought of how life was never about waiting for rescue. It was about fighting until the end. And now, as the stars glowed brighter ahead, He knew this was the turning point, the moment when he was no longer just a passenger, but the reason they still breathed. The cruiser drifted free of the densest part of the asteroid field. Smoke filled its corridors, sparks hissed from broken panels, the hull scarred and bruised, yet still whole. The passengers sat in silence, their wide eyes fixed on the man who had kept them alive. Daniel stood on the command deck, his body heavy with exhaustion, his hands raw from work, his voice hoarse from shouting, but his eyes still sharp. He looked at the screen. More rocks floated ahead, smaller, less dense, but still dangerous. The ship could not take much more. Engines failing again. An officer whispered. Pods all burned. No more thrust. The crew bowed their heads, despair settling once more. The captain's silver eyes dimmed. He muttered, "We cannot escape. Not with this power." Daniel clenched his jaw, his thoughts racing. He looked at the crew, their shoulders slumped, their glowing eyes filled with defeat, and he felt a fire rise inside him. He slammed his hand on the panel. "You can escape," he said. "You just don't believe it yet." The crew turned, shocked by his voice. Daniel pointed at the systems. "You still have batteries, emergency reserves, small. Yes, but power is power. Link them together, push everything through the engines for one last burn. It will either save us or tear the ship apart. But sitting here will kill us for sure." The captain studied him, silence filling the deck. Finally, he nodded slowly. "Do it." The engineers rushed, opening panels, dragging out glowing cores the size of crates. Daniel joined them, lifting one with shaking arms, sweat dripping down his face. The weight almost too much, but he refused to drop it. Together they linked the batteries, cables sparking, energy building. The ship hummed with unstable power. "Engines ready," one engineer cried. "But unstable. Maybe seconds only." "Seconds is all we need," Daniel said, his voice fierce. The captain raised his hand, gave the order, "Fire." The deck shook violently. The engines screamed like wounded beasts. The ship lurched forward, fire trailing from its rear. Outside, the asteroid spun past. The cruiser shot through a narrow gap, rocks scraping its shields, sparks bursting inside, but it held. Passengers screamed, some with fear, others with joy. The ship tilted, rocks flew by so close they could see their jagged edges through the windows. Then suddenly, light filled the screen, stars clear, wide, endless. The cruiser burst free of the field, limping into open space. For a long moment, silence held the deck. No alarms, no screams, only the steady hum of engines cooling. Then a cheer rose, loud, powerful, filling the corridors. Aliens cried out in their tongue, voices trembling with relief. Children laughed and clapped. Mothers held them tight. The captain turned to Daniel, his silver skin glowing faint under the soft lights. He stepped forward and raised his hand in a gesture of deep honor. "Human," he said, his voice low but steady. "You were passenger, but now you are savior. We owe you all lives." The crew lowered their heads, not from fear, not from desperation, but from true respect, their glowing eyes filled with awe. Daniel looked at them, tired, humbled. He shook his head. "I only did what anyone should do," he said softly. But the aliens whispered to each other, their voices carrying through the deck. "No," they said. "No one else could. Only human." Daniel sat down finally, his body aching, but his spirit steady. He thought of Earth, of how small it was compared to the endless stars. Yet in this vast galaxy, a simple human passenger had shown strength no machine could measure. The captain spoke again, his deep voice carrying across the deck. "From this day, no one will call humans weak. No one will call them small. They will remember the one who stood in the void and fought the dark." The passengers clapped. The crew bowed. Daniel lowered his head, exhausted but proud. He had boarded as nothing more than a traveler, but he left this moment as something far greater. And as the ship sailed slowly toward safety, scarred but alive, the aliens knew they had witnessed a truth that would echo through their people for generations. Never underestimate a human.